My name is Grace McKenna. I am a metadata project archivist for the CENTRO Library and Archives. For our third and final panel of the day, we will learn about the various techniques and approaches for archiving art. Expertise comes from archivists, librarians, artists, and museum workers who ethically engage with artwork and their documentation, which pertains to the artist's life and their work. Moderating this panel is CENTRO's Archives Collections Manager, Cristina Fontánez.
Thank you, Grace. Buenas tardes a todos. Thank you for being here today. We're happy to be able to share in the process of archiving with you and hope that the experiences shared here inspired you to document your lives and your work. Our panelists today are Farris Wahbeh, who is the Benjamin and Irma Weiss Director of Research Resources at the Whitney Museum, Valerie Irizarry, who is the archivist at Foco, and Barbara Calderón, faculty and art librarian at the School of Visual Arts. This panel will consist of 3 very short presentations, followed by a moderated discussion and a Q&A. So first, we'll hear from Farris. Farris works within the field of cultural informatics to enhance access to art and archival collections. At the Whitney Museum of American Art, he oversees the Frances Mulhall Aquiles Library and Archives, the Permanent Collection Documentation Office, which maintains the cataloging and content standards related to works of art in the Whitney's permanent collection, as well as visual resources. Wahbeh also spearheaded, along with the Conservation Department, the Media Preservation Initiative, a focus project on the digital preservation and archival documentation of time-based media works of art. Wahbeh has gained experience from a wide range of institutions, including Columbia University's Rare Book and Manuscripts Library, the Getty Research Institute, the Creative Audio Archive, and Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Arts. Farris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us on this Friday to talk about archives, which is my favorite thing to speak about with our esteemed panelists as well. And my talk is more of a question session to really think about, all right, let me go here. Question session to think about how archiving art is framed and how we should think about going into an artist's studio, an artist's home, an artist's basement, to really think about what's going on and to really think about techniques and questions you want to ask. Before you go, after you go, while you're there, to think about how artists work. So it's actually framed around these 3 areas of artists, works of art, and record keeping, and I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to go pretty quick. The questions are on top there. I'll guide you through it, but also I have a worksheet that has these questions, and if you guys would like that, I can definitely share that with you. So we'll start with the artist. So when you think about an artist's work, and you think about their archives, a lot of it is rooted within their practice and really thinking about what they do and how they do it. A lot of artists work across mediums, some of them work just on one medium. So really thinking about what their practice is. Has it changed through time? Have their thoughts about their work changed since they created the work? But also thinking about, the mediums that they practice in. Do they work primarily in one medium, such as painting or video, or do they work across? Because a lot of these questions will really form how you go into thinking about archiving, organizing, and cataloging someone's work, especially an artist's work. And again, thinking about stability of their practice in terms of are they working with stable media? Are they working with ones that are not? Digital art, for example, is very unstable, even though it's very new. So really thinking about the mediums, but also how do they work? Because a lot of time people's records can go from just staying within their studio, or they can really go working with external vendors. So a lot of times artists, engage with printers or with other videographers, perhaps. So there's a lot of information that the artist may not have or may have. So really thinking about how artists do work, because a lot of times archiving art is really associated with their artistic output. And so, again, another archival concept is provenance. And so thinking about how original organization was with artists, how their ideas are kept. Do they have a journal? Do they have a diary? How do they have any sort of organization by date, by decade, by theme, by medium? And also, what kind of information do they have? And really, a lot of times I've worked in many different environments where you whether it's an artist studio or you go into a storage unit, and a lot of times it's kind of like an archaeological excavation, and having those like sort of questions in the back of your mind saying like, is there some sort of pattern? Is there a pattern in the boxes? Is there a pattern within the folder? And sometimes it's not clear, but sometimes it does become clear as you start sifting and waiting and looking, and really you get to know a person by how they organize or do not organize something. And so when you think about their works of art, really thinking about how a work of art is conceptualized by the artist. A lot of times people take for granted that if something's on the wall that it's in a certain orientation, but a lot of times that may not be the case. And we have, working with different types of collections, you can't take anything for granted. And I think that's one of the things artists, when I work with them, tell that you have to write things down. Like you assume when you're in the process of making art that it's really transparent, but it actually may not be to people who are not in your studio while you're executing your work. So really thinking about encouraging artists, if they are alive, to really have these questions notated down somewhere. And again, like if they are deceased, trying to like get some sort of pattern from it and making, what we call an archival a scope content note, for lack of a better word. And also like really being transparent about how you think of the artist practice. Like a lot of times people work in multiples, but you may not know that if you don't actually put the edition run, or if it's unique, actually stating that. And also a lot of times what I've come across with both artist archives, but also works of art, really thinking and taking care of how a work is installed and how it should be installed, or if it should be installed at all. And especially conservation becomes a really key question to ask, to really like find out in the archives, or actually keep in the archives. Should a work be treated or not? And how should it be treated? A lot of times we've come across artists who worked exclusively on film for their works of art, but then, they still want to maintain 16 millimeter, the actual print as opposed to digitizing it. So if the materiality is really important to the work of art and to the artist practice, it's really good to notate that as well. As well as, this is something we in the archival world, again, the whole notion of the office of record, in this case, the artist studio, really thinking about how things are maintained, especially if they're going to degrade, and especially if they are using materials that are no longer made or obsolete, especially when you find something that's not organized properly. And so you want to think about how do you maintain its stability in its fragile state. And finally, record keeping, which is why we're here today. I think one of the biggest things that I found is really being holistic to the artist practice and how they work. The artist working method will really influence thinking about how you go into thinking about works of art, whether they're found in an archive or are isolated by themselves, is really thinking about the working habits of the artist. How did they work? Some of them are very diligent, which is great, and others are not because they don't think about that while they're working. So you want to embed all of these questions based on the artist working method, truly, because every artist is not the same. We're all snowflake human beings, but artist practice as well, like really are tied to how they conceive of their output and their artistic sort of work. And so maintaining documentation, whether it's one sentence or a whole book, is good. Just making sure that it's actually understood, because you can never assume that something is understandable once it's outside of your studio or outside of your sort of hands. So, giving notes on how you work, it's great if you can embed that, if an artist can embed that in their sort of practice, but if not, if you're going in there, if it's a family member or a loved one or someone in the community, like really thinking about maintaining transparency so that you can actually help with the process of either retaining the archives or donating it to an institution or organization. And again, if you're saddled with an artist or a person who does not have like any sort of way of organizing thing, really thinking about what is the like easiest, or if not easiest, what is the most organic way to organize things or describe things in an organizational manner, to really group things by either decade or medium or type of record. For example, if there's lots of files that are administrative records for their practice, or if they're correspondence with vendors or other artists or family members, really grouping things by type of record is a good way to also keep consistency. And if you need to, like a lot of times what I love is devising sort of like organizational patterns. Like, so example, if you can find a way to organize things when you're ready to do that, I think a lot of the process is coming into an environment where you're looking to absorb and to understand someone's life's work. The next step is to really conceptualize how things may be organized. And sometimes a numbering system is helpful. And so even at the inventory level, it could be really great to have some sort of transparent numbering system that's actually defined. And this can be not just for physical things, but electronic things. As like laptops have a lot of great information. Sometimes they're just thrown on. If you look at a desktop sometimes that with like a whole smorgasbord of files, that freaks me out. Organize your desktop. If you can, even with like a small little folder that says notes, 2023. So you can just have a way of like, organizing things. So organizational principles is not just part of physical files, but they can also be digital files, and really thinking about record keeping, whether you're the artist yourself or you're a caregiver, or if you are a person who has inherited a legacy of sorts, is always to kind of think of consistency and to really maintain that if you can. And if you can't, always document how you're administering archival materials, whether you're keeping it in-house or if you're donating it to an organization. And continuity is one of those key things that underline everything for me, but sometimes you can't, because a lot of times you'll have different studio assistants or you'll have different people helping, but as long as you can even describe that chronology, that'd be really great. And finally, never assume that anything will be understood, because you may not know. And so, or the people coming back 50 years, 75 years may not know what you were thinking when you were creating a work of art or creating a record. So really thinking about how to make your work understandable. And that's it from me. I hope I was.
Thank you, Farris. Okay, so next up we have Valerie Irizarry. Irizarry is an artist and cultural worker of Afro-Caribbean descent, born and raised in the Bronx. She earned a BS in computer graphics and imaging from Lehman College in the Bronx, New York, and in 2007, a certificate in art handling from the Bronx Council of the Arts. That was in 2012. For over a decade, she has worked as a freelance art handler in the Bronx at such institutions as Longwood Art Gallery at Altos, Defner Judaica Museum and Hebrew Home at Riverdale, and Bronx River Arts Center, among others. After completing a training program at Joan Mitchell Foundation, where she worked on the Creating a Living Legacy project database for older artists, she presently holds the role of Collections and Archives Manager at Foco.
Hi everybody. I don't know if you noticed, but basically I came at archiving in a very untraditional way. Started out as an art handler, so I know art. I know work that's probably never going to survive 10 years because the artist didn't really think about that, and work that will span the ages. At some point, I was fortunate enough to get a position as archivist at Foco. And it's been an amazing, joyful ride for the past 2 years. I have been able to look at basically the photographic history of the Bronx, of New York, of basically people of color, that has given me a whole new idea of what art is and what the process is and what it means in the past, in the future, in the present. I was lucky enough at the beginning of this year to get to see the archives of and the artwork of Sophie Rivera. It excited me to no end to be able to look at not just the artwork of another human being, but the process, the pieces of ephemera that she held on to, even newspaper clippings of things that probably gave her an idea for her photography. And it basically made me think about the legacy of many, many artists out there whose work may not actually live past them because their families have no idea what to do with it, or, it does live, but within a world of like museums and galleries that basically leave that work to be collecting dust somewhere. At Foco, we want the work to have its own living breath. We want people to be able to see it and understand what the artists were doing and get an idea of what they were thinking and see the history of their work from when they started as a wee little artist to becoming a big deal, or however their careers go. But it's important that, we keep our legacies, not just artists, even families, that we understand that everything in our lives was a process. It was a journey from beginning to middle to end, and we should not just let it collect dust on a shelf. So at Foco, we have started working on putting all of that information, like basically a collections and archives library. We've started with the artists that we've had in our magazine, Nueva Luz, and soon we will keep working on it, put in all of our exhibitions, all of our other artists that have not actually made it to Nueva Luz yet, anyone we've worked with, including organizations like El Centro, and have this basically an online living thing that shows people what we as a community have done and what we plan on doing, and it won't die or just sit on a shelf collecting dust. I'm pretty sure that's much shorter than 10 minutes.
That's totally fine.
But yeah, so if you get a chance, go to enfoco.org and you can check out our study center now. It's the Nueva Luz Study Center because it centers around the artists that have been in Nueva Luz. That's our journal, our magazine. And keep checking up on us because we're growing and we're making strides to get the legacies of our artists out there so that they're not forgotten, so that we're not forgotten, so that the Bronx is not forgotten.
Thank you. Okay, and lastly, we'll hear from Barbara Calderón. Barbara is a New York City-based writer, artist, and founding member of the arts collective Colectiva Cósmica. She is currently faculty and art librarian at the School of Visual Arts. She was previously the assistant director of the Latinx project at NYU, and her art criticism has been published by Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, ArtNet, Art21, among others. She was also a recipient of the 2020 Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grants.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I am not here as a traditional archivist, but as a writer and an information professional or information worker prioritizing the voices of underrepresented artists and trying to contextualize their practices and providing more avenues of access and discoverability for their work. So I'm a writer slash critic, not a very popular word, but it is what it is. I'm an art librarian, and then also I teach writing at the School of Visual Arts. So just teaching generally. These are some of my writings. So just kind of contextualizing the work of particular artists, particularly Latinx artists. This is Diana Sofia Lozano. This was the cover story for Art in America a few months ago. And then Felipe Baeza for ArtNet, who represented, or not represented, but was included in the Venice Biennale last year. Also, Ruben Ulysses Rodriguez Montoya, who is kind of works across the country, comes to New York sometime, but mostly in LA. Yvette Mayerga, who is a Chicago-based artist. So I published in a lot of different online and a lot of online magazines, but also sometimes in print, such as the Art in America. I also recently wrote a catalog essay about Virginia Jaramillo, who was a Mexican-American abstract painter. She began painting in the 1950s, but wasn't really, didn't really start to get a lot of shows or exhibitions. Didn't get recognition until she was much older. And so her first retrospective didn't come till this year at 84 years old. And that retrospective happened at the Kemper Museum in Kansas. That's her on the right. I was very lucky to interview her. And so, yes, I got to write about her early life painting in Los Angeles. I also do conversations with artists. This was an artist talk I did with the painter Esteban Cabeza de Vaca and his mother, Rosario, who is a Chicana activist. So she began, work during the Chicano movement and still does work to this day. So, providing a lot of different avenues for talking about art, for talking about how the art came to be, talking to the actual inspiration. This was a really beautiful moment where we got to talk to the muse, right, for the work that this painter creates. So, but also, I've been writing for a very long time. I got my start at Remezcla. So it was an online magazine. It still is. It's gone through many changes, but when I started writing for them, I did a column about the art events going on in New York City. So, and just like really many, reviews of things, or just saying, oh, this is happening, what's going on. But I also got to do these profiles of artists like Tamara Santibáñez, Gabriel Garcia Roman, and Crystal Galindo. So that is my writing, the interpretation, how it kind of gets published in media. As an art librarian, I've worked for the School of Visual Arts for about 6 years in a very, first, in a, part-time capacity. Now I am a full-time librarian, and I manage a multi-use space. So we try to connect students to other students, but also just to information, to other departments, and to have them have a, just community space, a central space where they can feel somewhat connected to the larger world as well. So also as a librarian, I do reference and research and with different curation, which you'll see. So this is just, also more specifically about my duties, creating research guides. So also collection development, which just means, buying books and then doing instruction in classrooms on how to use library resources. So I very much am a user of archives and an interpreter of archives. And I help kind of, provide more spaces so that the archives are seen. So this was just a programming event that we did with a very experimental researcher and artist named Mindy Su, who recently wrote the book Cyberfeminism Index. And it's an online collection of resources about cyberfeminism. and it's also known as techno-critical works that began, not just the 1990s, actually, it's much earlier, but it's a living archive that is online. So in the collection development work, I buy books. So this is an artist's book. She's a painter from New Mexico. Her name is Grace Rosario Perkins. So as you can see, it's my own practice is very all over the place, but it makes sense when you kind of step back and look at what the thesis is. But this is a research guide about Black women in the arts that just is a curation of a variety of resources. So online books, but also DVDs, videos of online, like YouTube videos, just a collection of things to kind of get a student get their feet wet about a certain subject. So also as a librarian, we go to conferences as librarians, you meet like a lot of other professionals in the field. Cristina was there. This last year, it was in Mexico City, and we did this. Colleague Katie Moore and I did this poster called "Salvaging the Term Decolonization for Art Libraries," because the term decolonization is now, very much thrown around, and its teeth have kind of been removed in a lot of the discussions about what it is. But I'm bringing this up because a lot of artists, Instagram, people who show their art on Instagram or just have an Instagram following or voice, very much influence this project, particularly the artist Demian Dinya Yassi, Hustine. And this is from their Instagram. On Instagram, their name is Heterogeneous Homosexual. And it, as I said, it is about decolonization. And so this particular poster that they made is in response to a lot of institutions, museums, trying to be more diverse and equitable, yet not really truly being about it. So I'm just going to read what the poster says. If you're going back to your capitalist, racist, ableist, heterosis, normative, and classist ways, and not asking or providing us with what we need to create, survive, and uplift our communities without getting something in return, then you can burn your statements of solidarity. So, as in a more curatorial vein, this is when I was working at the Latinx project at NYU. I was able to put together a exhibition on zines by Latinx artists. It was called El Zine, Contemporary Underground Archives. So this is just the installation. Anybody could come to this space and take the zine off of the wall and read it, kind of leaf through the pages. There were photo zines. There were also poetry zines, advice zines, all sorts of things from around the U.S. in different Latinx communities. I also brought a lot of people, not a lot, a few people who run collectives across the U.S. To just come and talk about their work, making zines or doing different DIY art projects and just organizing their community. So also just as a library professional or librarian, someone who is kind of archive adjacent, I was asked to contribute to this discussion, which was an article about vintage photo, Latinx history through vintage photos, which is really what they're talking about is a lot of online or Instagram archives of photos that are community sourced. This article references Nueva Yorkinos on the left-hand side here. There are also just a lot of other Instagram archives that do a similar thing. There's Veteranas and Rucas on the right-hand side. So in talking about this, I was just talking about, or my contribution to the discussion was just how these type of, DIY archiving practices are not necessarily accepted by academia or libraries, because they're not coming from academia. The librarian or the archivist who is trained is not, consolidating the work or curating the work. It's just coming from an artist. But actually, these are so effective and so beautiful. And as you can see in the amount of followers that they have, people really are receptive to this, obviously, because we want to see ourselves, right? Yeah, and also in the discussion, it just, what's important is that archivists and librarians should be facilitating these communal archives or community sourced archives that live not just in other archives or libraries, but that are on popular platforms like Instagram or others that are similar. So also, I, along with 3 other friends in 2014, started a art collective called Colectiva Cósmica. We ourselves made a lot of zines, so this is kind of what being a part of Colectiva Cósmica and going to zine fairs since 2014, through 2018, I was able to amass a collection of zines. That's why I was able to also curate El Zine and put that together, because I had been, traveling to different zine fairs across the country and buying zines and meeting people and connecting with other people who organize their community and do art projects. So this is just some of the different zine fairs. Sorry, I'm going so fast. I only have 10 minutes. So these are just some of the flyers for the Zine Fest that we went to across, not just New York City, all over. We went to Chicago, went to LA. Zine fairs is a really amazing way to be able to learn about different local communities and the work that they do, not just, but also people who are a little more progressive in their thoughts and youth culture as well. So, in addition to the zines, we also started to collaborate with different museums, different cultural institutions. So this was just with the Highline Teens. We did a canto collaging workshop, which we did in a lot of other venues as well. But also just through the networks that were created through Cosmica and the different zine fests, I met so many other artists. I was able to go and speak to a middle school class and share my zine collection with them. And this is just a picture of one of the little kids choosing reading the zine that they chose to read, which was about abolishing the police. I love that picture. And then also just creative projects. So a lot of collage, hands-on workshops that this was a self-portrait collage workshop where Itzel Martinez, who is my #1 creative collaborator, did with me at Brick. So she's a photographer, and so she took photos of the people that were there and we printed them right away, and they were able to create these collages with their own image and were able to take home artwork that they made. So this is just our, mission as a collective, is just to challenge mainstream representation in the art worlds by encouraging collaboration and supporting creativity in all feminine spirits. So that's a run through of the different types of work that I have done throughout the years and how it, tends to source from different archives. Thank you.
Those were amazing perspectives of everything having to do with documenting art. I have a couple of questions before we open it up to the public. So I'm wondering how, or if you can talk about your experiences with uncovering documentation about a work, and how has that helped to reinterpret it, to reinterpret that work, whether it's how it's exhibited, how it's accessed, how it's critiqued.
We always unmind stuff in the archives. And it's funny because a lot of times people want to go into the archives expecting to find the golden nugget that will reveal everything about somebody, an artist. But a lot of times the archives are really mundane records. I mean, really, they're scraps of paper or a receipt, and a lot of archives are and I think why I'm attracted to archives is because they are mundane. They're everyday life. They're really what you expect to see when you open that drawer where you throw everything into it, like screwdrivers and Post-its and like a spoon. And that's what I like about archives. And a lot of times what you do find in there is like something written down that actually opens up a lot of things, right? And so sometimes it's a lot of digging. I do remember we did find information like that, like on a like menu or something that like the artist wrote about their work, and it turned out like we had been showing the work like the wrong way. And this was like back in Chicago, but it was like it was interesting because you do find stuff like that you may not that either opens up a lot of different things and units too, but it takes a lot of like discovery.
I think that, especially for people in the library archives field, we get really excited about finding treasure, about like digging and then coming across, something new. We want to find something new. So it's like when you get a reference question that's like really difficult and you're like, oh my God, we gotta go look in all the different places that exist online. And then you're like, oh yes, finally, like that like challenge.
I find that a lot of what I find isn't really about the art per se. It's more about the process getting to the art. So you tend to find things like letters or even clippings or things like that that point towards what the artist might have been thinking of when they decided to make said art. And you could honestly jump down a rabbit hole of research once you find one little nugget of information.
And how does working more with documentation versus the work itself impact the way that you engage with art, both as a person who, for example, would visit a gallery, but also as an archivist or an information professional?
Or as a person who just hangs the work?
I wouldn't say just.
Well, to be honest with you, it gives everything depth, if that helps any. Sometimes you just look at something and it's pretty, or like that's great, but I'm not entirely sure. Like I'm not connecting with this piece of work. Sometimes when you find things that have more to do with the inspiration, it's just deeper. You actually feel more than you would if you're just looking at an image or a piece of art.
Agreed.
Yes, 100%.
You said it so poetically.
I mean, art, the final product, like the art that's on the wall can, it's, anybody can have a subjective experience with it. But when you look at archives or you look at the process, you're looking at a narrative of a person and a person who's in society and what's going on, during the time that they're living, where they are, what they're seeing. And so you develop a larger story. And yeah, that's just much more compelling, especially to, when you think of like the interpretation or the historical background. Like you can have that subjective experience with art, but there's also this element of like truth in a way to why somebody made something, a type of truth, right?
Authenticity. Yeah.
I think it's more genealogy too. You see the evolution in many ways. I don't know.
Yeah, and speaking of the final product, this may be a controversial question, but Valerie, you spoke about preserving the legacy of these artists that may be lost, and Farris, you were talking about new artists or contemporary artists working with unstable mediums, for example. Regardless of preserving the documentation about the artwork, how much do you think a artist should care about permanence when choosing a format, when choosing a medium, and how much of an impact should the opinion of an archivist have on that?
I mean, honestly, I don't look. The thing is that an artist may decide that their work is not permanent. I mean, especially if you're a graffiti artist, you don't think what you put on that wall is going to be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to feel like, as an archivist, I'm like, yeah, sure, I want to see everything. I want to see it. I want to see everything you've ever done. But trust me, I mean, I'm technically a fashion designer on the side, and not every single thing I draw I want everyone to see. And some artists are big on making art that does deteriorate. So sometimes just having the photograph is all you have left of said artwork. Or the fact that some people got to see it and it's in their memory is all you have left of said artwork. So sadly, it's hard for me to go, well, as an archivist, I want everything to be here forever, because not everyone strives for that. But I feel like an artist who does feel like they need to have that legacy need to figure out how to preserve said work.
I mean, artists need to do their thing. Like, you can't like impose any sort of preservation, conservation things from the get-go. I think you have to work through that. And I think a lot of it times is like, you know, the artist does what the artist does, and that's to create something. I think us as like archivists, collection managers is really situating that in a way that really contextualizes the work, even if it's not stable in physical form or digital form. Like, and again, I think part of it too is what we were talking about going back is like, if a work of art, because the artist created as such that it's not stable, then like it is the archivist's, you know, sort of responsibility to actually write a note and make it like clear why, and like give it that historical context that really frames it in a way that makes it understood, because you can't save everything. That would be impossible.
I have an agreement with a few of my friends, you know, that whoever dies first has to clean the others like archive.
Yeah.
That's so great.
We're all gonna die very soon.
Okay, so my last question, kind of going by what you mentioned, Barbara, about the Instagram archives and how we as archivists, like a lot of times we're gatekeepers of that term archivist and who can be an archivist. For me, anybody who's doing archival work is an archivist. It's as easy as that. But can you talk about how we can create linkages between people working with formal training or in traditional institutional archives and folks who are trying to do archival work in a way that it's not extractivist, that it's ethical, and that it's also, we're not imposing our ideas on what an archives is. Mm-hmm. How can we, from the information practice place, work with these types of collections?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the question is, it just goes back to resources. When you work for an institution, you have to get, you know, permission to use your institution's resources to go into the community and collect. So you're an advocate, right? You have to make the case for whatever you know, say you see Nueva Yorkinos and you're like, oh wow, this person is doing the work in the field. Let me figure out how I can get them funds in order to more, you know, stably archive things. I look at like how other artists have done this, like Guadalupe Rosales, who does Veteranas and Rucas, works with UCLA, and they are housing her archive for her. So, developing community bonds and making sure that you do have a local connection as a librarian or archivist with the place, that's like absolutely necessary. But it's really hard to get your, the higher ups on board. There needs to be a community. Like SVA doesn't have a community librarian. I think I am a community librarian, but that's not my title. I have to do instruction, I have to do reference, I have to do all these other things. But kind of thinking of the importance of what a community archivist or librarian, how that position is needed in all institutions.
Okay, so we're gonna open it up for Q&A.
Thank you for a really great panel. At the Lesbian History Archives, we moved from the Upper West Side to Brooklyn, to Park Slope. And in the layout of the building, we protected space specifically for first-time artists to have exhibit space because we knew the content and the artist's way might be something that might not be as welcome in traditional gallery spaces and other exhibition spaces. And there's a lot of ethical about that. And there's a lot of pushback from community who says, why don't you want to display mine? And I don't know in the various roles that you play, if you can talk at all about the ethics of what your role is and how that informs the opportunity of exhibit or public art or incorporated types of art into various spaces. And if that informs the work that you do.
So my institutional connection is SVA at the moment. And they, as far as the branch of the library that I'm in, they didn't really have an exhibition space carved out yet. So I found one, and just, you're like, oh, we should use this, right? And what we did was do a call for zines from students. And I also had the library workers, my student workers, choose from the call. So creating another space for the students to exhibit their work, curated by students as well. Pushback, absolutely. There was that. Well, because theirs was okay when they did it. Then it became like a exhibition for zines. It kind of morphed into a space where we could just put zines that were free to take. But then we wanted to have them represent what was going on socially at the moment, right? So a migrant crisis, so like we're in this political moment where things are happening, and we're like, okay, let us show you some perspectives on this through zines. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, who is choosing these zines? Like, are you speaking for the library? Are you, whose perspective is getting, prioritized? Right. So, and then it just dies after that, because nobody wants to do it because nobody feels free anymore. You feel censored, or it just becomes too much bureaucratic red tape. There's a process you have to go through in order to do it. And it's so much fun in the beginning because you just are able to do whatever. But as soon as somebody in some way, doesn't agree with you, I mean, that's the problem with working for like institutions. But I guess you're not an institution though. Your community is the one that's like checking you. I don't know, being democratic about it, like maybe like some sort of like I don't have the answer. Survey, like asking your community what they want. And I mean, exhibitions are something that change, right? Like you can like also carve out time for historical and carve out time for contemporary. I think that's like one solution, maybe.
I'm not asking the question because we think it's a problem that needs solving. I want to know when you do a review, if you consider whether this artist has other opportunities, if there's the ethics of what gets reviewed, part of your review, and in your case, what you collect.
Right.
I can say that SBA has like done, since I've been there, maybe like 20 exhibits on Milton Glaser, and I'm like, that's enough. Can we stop? But who's gonna listen to me? I don't know.
I mean, for us, like at the Whitney, we have a curatorial department. And so the curators, suggest exhibitions, and it goes through a process of presentations and going through the whole thing. So there is definitely like a review process. I mean, my department, Research Resources, provides, necessary resources for research, hence research resources, because to help and aid curators to establish a thesis or to like strengthen what their, curatorial voices with the artists they're working with, whether they're alive or deceased. So in my role, we provide archival materials. Sometimes they get shown. Sometimes they don't. It really depends on the nature of the exhibition. So it's a collaboration with curators who then in turn work with other artists or estates. So it is definitely a process of, of going in and contextualizing and understand what the process is for the exhibition, and then finally it's exhibited. And it's a process. It takes a while through that review.
Well, our shows are grant-based, basically. We have the fellowship, which is, any photographer can enter into it. And it is, of course, juried. And we get panelists that are outside of us to decide what work will get a grant, what artists will get that grant. We also, not just photography, now we actually also have the media fund where people who do film and things like that can actually be involved. But we're open to photographers, just photographers, not any specific. We don't do too many curated shows in that sense. Well, I do, but mine is curating the actual collection we already have. But the rest of it is open to people in whatever career path they're on. So we don't just have like established photographers. Sometimes we have photographers who have never had a show in their lives. But it's not like we make the decision as to who's going to be in that show. We actually get a group of others to choose those people. So it's a bit different than, curating a show for, I don't know, just any photographer who's been doing Jamal Sabat's. You know what I mean? That's not what we do, unless, of course, we have his work and I put that show together. But otherwise, people get a chance. And anybody who's entered into trying to get into one of our grants and shows, we keep that information. So when other things come up, we go, hey, why don't you try for this? Hey, why don't you try for that? So people don't feel like they've been gatekept from being able to be in an exhibition. Now, as far as galleries go, we don't have one, so we have to work really hard to find some place to show these works. But it's, there's no gatekeeping. There's no, well, why didn't I get in? I mean, sadly, because somebody, like the people who chose decided that these other works were better, but we also do that too. We try to give them an idea of why. Maybe it was presentation, maybe it was, you didn't word things properly, but we keep trying to get the artist shown.
Hi, I have some questions from the chat. How do you go about getting consent and being ethical about archiving your art when your art is portrait photography / event photographies with many members of the community, etc.?
Ethics are legal. Because ethically, you basically need to let people know that you're photographing them so that they can be in some sort of a show or something. Legally, you have something drawn up that they sign.
I mean, with event photography, you'll notice some signs in public places that says, if you are in this room, we are recording or photographing. So if you're in this room, be advised. I mean, it's a big negotiation. I think you have certain, levels of access. So like for research value, so research collections where there's a big body of materials coming in, really like the purpose of whether it's put on the web or on the wall, or if it's just in the files for researchers to come in. There's so many different levels, and also like how those materials came into the archival collection. So there's so many different layers of negotiation there and understanding the context of it. But it's a way of really figuring out where the provenance of those, materials came from, and was it the institutions, or was it from the outside? Like, how did it get to the archives and really establishing that order as helpful? So yeah.
What do you see as effective mechanisms for passing along skills to curate, maintain, and or begin to establish an archive, especially for archivists that are not academically trained and want to pursue that as a professional role, whether inside or outside a larger institution?
Just want to say one thing. As an archivist, most of what you learn doing it. You learn on the job. There is such thing as archival theory that we follow, that we learn in school. But you won't even get a job if you only have a degree. You have to have experience, first of all. There are also many, many resources that are out there for archivists, whether you're academically trained or not, because the archives field is ever changing. A lot of them are free, actually. So whether you're starting something because you got hired into a job and then suddenly you're an archivist, or whether because you're thinking of building your own archive or getting a job as an archivist, there are many resources out there in Spanish, in English, that you can just like search for. Literally, you can Google them and start to think about how to create an archive. And this is also a shout out to our DIY archiving guide that's going to be up on our website tomorrow. That just like gives you a start on just like step by step on how to create an archives, and kind of like also our ethical and theoretical considerations that we have when we're doing things that are seemingly technical, like organizing something. There's actually like a theory behind that.
I mean, I'm still learning. And she's right. There are resources out there that you can just Google and find. And some of them are classes, webinars. Sometimes you can actually find a book that's just free to read. And
software also, so there's software.
And there's software. Mm-hmm. And if you're really, really lucky, you become friends with someone who actually does archiving, and you pick their brains.
Yeah, there's, just to name, the Society of American Archivists as resources, the International Council of Archives as resources in English, Spanish, and French. There's the Community Archiving Workshop. They have resources on AV preservation. Witness.org has resources on archiving social justice movements and doing it ethically, and especially talking about AV material. So there's really like a lot of organizations out there, including CENTRO and other institutional archives, who will put out guides like the ones that Barbara was showing, guides about how to be an archivist. Mm-hmm. It's really, we are more generous with our work than we seem.
A lot of public libraries too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, every family usually has one family member that's an archivist.
Yes.
Yeah. They just need, that guide to like apply. Also, I did for any artist here, just like organize your files like as best as you can. And then there's like the rule of 3, I think is really basically important, is that save your work in 3 different physical places.
You mentioned a lot in or it came up, talking about art that was just not made to be long-term, ephemeral, or the medium or way it was created. And considering that as archivists, we're kind of thinking about that long-term and we're just custodians for a short period of time, how do you approach archiving that type of work that isn't expected to live forever? Or what are the expectations that you set with maybe the artists of like how this is going to be preserved or not preserved for the long term?
You try with every fiber of your being to preserve that work of art for as long as it will live. And I mean, that may take some research, things like that. But I mean, like, say you do find a graffiti artist and they do all of their graffiti on cardboard. It's acidic. It will be destroyed at some point. But if you can find some way of preserving it for as long as you can, you're doing 120% more than anyone else would.
Yeah, and there's, preservation measures like light levels, keeping, works on paper out of light if it's decomposing or degrading. And I think a lot of times a lot of things are not going to last, even if they are stable, and I think part of it is creating measures in which you can extend their lifetime, even though everything is like slowly, degrading, even if it is the most stable thing. And also it's like speaking to artists and seeing like what the threshold is, like how do they feel about their work? I think part of it too is understanding, how something will look in 100 years. Like, what if this file format that you're using doesn't exist? Like, what are your thoughts about that? Do you want to? Is there the aesthetic quality to it, or is it the more like the idea of it? Like, does it have to like a lot of times artists will have technology in their work, like a computer. Like, is it actually what's playing on the computer? Is it the look of the computer? So do we need to like, preserve the actual physical thing, or does that not matter? Is it what's playing in the computer? So there's a lot of questions too about like the sort of intention, both like intellectual, aesthetic, and working, intention of the work and the artists and how they perceive it. So a lot of it too is just like having that sort of oral history of the work in many ways, so that even when the artist is not there, that is a part of the record.
Thinking about digital artists and people who like really are not, a lot of artists don't even think like it's part of the process. Like I have a friend who does a lot of videos on and posts them on their stories on Instagram. They don't think that that's their artwork. I do. And I'm like, we need to have a talk about like, are you saving these videos? Right? It's just like simply that, right? Like the process is now lives so digitally, and it's really important not to rely on platforms that are owned by institutions or that companies, corporations. Yeah.
It lives in Instagram. So my question is about the longevity, like how as archivists understanding the digital side of it, which is super complicated, about like how to also let them know, be a gatekeeper of that, because these are big, humongous companies who are, at the end of the day, they can delete your account.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's older projects like Everyday Bronx or Everyday Mexico. I'm wondering, because these are visually amateur photographers who are putting photos of their communities in these platforms, or how to have them also safe, because these are really important. These are like everyday single second recorded moments of our communities who can be dismissive at any moment. And that was something that I actually wanted to bring it up. Like, how do we, like a project like New Yorkinos, she's been working so hard to have like the community just putting out images of families within the 5 boroughs. How do we tell them? How do we keep them? How do we help to digitize for next generations to come? Because another platform is going to come and it's going to wipe out Instagram. So that was just my question.
Complicated. Yeah, we definitely don't. Yeah, we definitely don't have the answer. But what we can do is like try and keep as much physical things as possible. Like the physical world is still very, very important. I think just like print things out. Screenshot and print. Absolutely. Well, yes, but try and also, if you can, keep the actual photograph or the actual negative or.
And web recordings, recording, the Instagram account as a web recorded file. So you see how you interact with the actual application too might be important. Like when you click on the story circle and it pops up, like there's different ways of approaching that. And I think the content too, like you're saying, it's really important. And being like platform agnostic, like you're saying, like in future generations to come, and thinking about like the project as a whole, like how do you capture that? Is it there's so many different questions and we can go on.
I know.
And it's like, is it like is Instagram the actual platform where this project exists because the way it interacts with the community and the way it looks
comments.
aesthetically? Yeah, comments.
Exactly. I did a screenshot the comments too. Like it's so important, the comments,
And so there's so many different layers to it, Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, I think definitely like that's where we need to work on building bridges with these types of projects. We were actually talking with New Yorkinos yesterday at CENTRO. So that's good. But I think a lot of these projects that get to a point where they are aware that they're not an archives in a traditional sense, but Sometimes the issue is that the people that are interacting with that are not aware of that. So the creator is fully aware that this is an access platform that we are calling an archives. But sometimes people are submitting materials and thinking that they are going to be preserved when they're not, because they're owned by Meta, because you put them on their platform, which is really like an issue. It's an issue of education, really, is what it is. But I wouldn't knock them because they bring so much joy, first of all, and that's we can't minimize the important, effective importance of these types of projects.
I actually came to the program, which is really terrific, by the way. Thank you, everybody. Because I'm like a lot of other people, maybe my age perhaps, who have albums at home with pictures all over the place. I came to find out, what do I do with those? I don't want to lose them. And then I said to myself, why don't we scan them? She said, yeah, but that program's not going to be forever. I said, no. Is this going to help me figure out what to do with those pictures?
Yes. You can go. Are you coming tomorrow? Okay. Okay.
Great. It's just so interesting, just like really scientific, okay, science fiction.
Yeah.
All this stuff that I'm learning because really, I just didn't think about all these old pictures. You know, like centuries ago, you want to keep them and you want to see them, but they're already turning. Pictures and you see the pictures are getting darker and darker. It's kind of sad.
And it happens more quickly with digital photography.
Yes. Oh my, and the photos I was taking in those days are not like the photos they take on now. They're up to date.
Paper
So, yeah, thank you so much.
I just wanted to say too that you know, sometimes it might be worth just like visiting your local public library or a public library or a university who might have interest in your historical ephemera, like your photographs. So I have one of my best friends, Maribel Falcon. She is an archivist at the Benton Latin American Collection. So she's constantly trying to meet people in the community to get their archives. So she showed me a picture of Selena Quintanilla's funeral pamphlet. Like she went and found somebody who had all of these physical archives related to going to Selena concerts, and she found this person via just knowing people, and then the Benson collected this big box of things. So you never know. You might be able. Somebody might be able to connect you with a archivist who can then help you preserve.
Yeah, one question. We've been talking about the person who creates the art and the person who preserves the art. But all the people in the middle, right? Like people who collects art that has been produced by someone else. What's the role? What's the responsibility? At Centro, we have received many artwork that are part of somebody else's collection. And sometimes it's really hard to say, was this created by the person who is gifting this collection? How do we manage that? Especially when it comes to photography, which is sometimes super hard to deal with. And sort of like to close a little bit this conversation, what will be the role of our communities when it comes to archiving art? What's our proactive role on this whole preservation process? Because the responsibility is not limited to the work that you guys do. It's a shared responsibility.
Yes, it's a shared responsibility.
Yes, we agree.
I like that. I think it's context, really. I think it's really providing that space in which archives are understood on many different layers, whether it's like who did the collecting, who came before that in someone's home, in someone's studio, as much as you can, providing that context and if it doesn't exist, starting that historical narrative of what's going on, so that there is like a genealogy of information that future generations can sort of use for their purposes, whether it's research or use in a book. I don't know. There's so many different, but I think part of it too is starting that process of contextualizing information. Because again, the most what you think are the simplest things could in 100 years be very important, even if it's this person processed this, or this person came and dropped this off at this date and this time, like all these little like sort of small historical that seem insignificant administrative details actually do make sense. So I think part of it is like starting that narrative, starting that history, starting that sort of context from which archives are understood to be as such, so that it's, within our shared responsibility, whether it's the organization or the researcher coming in 50 years, or the archivist who's processing it, or, the donor who's donating it, like really are folded into the larger narrative, so that there's an understanding of historical situatedness and context, I think.
I can add something to that. I think that also makes me think of the concept of provenance. In archives, what that means to us is who created something. But in this case, when we're talking about collectivity and community, not only one person created something. So I think it's important when we're thinking about these types of collections that are about community and that exist sometimes in the margins or in the fringes, and we want to embed ourselves into that as opposed to getting people to accommodate us. We need to be flexible with these concepts. So in terms of like our responsibility of safeguarding our memories, whether I created something or my neighbor, or it was from an art show that I went to that I think would be like historically valuable, I think that's more important than thinking about who created this in the beginning. This goes against, if you were here for the copyright panel, this goes against everything from that panel. But in terms of like the more, again, the affective nature and the memory making processes, they don't happen the way that we theorize archives. They don't have, there's no beginning and an end. One thing isn't necessarily created by one person. So just your question made me think about just collective responsibility and how it really doesn't go well hand in hand with our very white-centered capitalist archival principles, such as provenance.
Yeah.
I have a question. I think I myself wanted to ask but as someone who is experimenting with archives, how does one combine the archive and the field of research with fiction narratives in order to fill the gaps in the archive? And I don't know if anyone can answer that.
What a beautiful question. Well, it just makes me think of like world building and like the artistic practice as a space of being able to imagine, new futures, new ways forward. And what is the role of that in the archive, right? Well, I mean, it's like the imagination. It's like that's creativity can be anything, right? Like, and not like believing that art is one thing or that what you archive is one thing. It could be a voice note. It could be, like all of these different, any medium.
I think of it like as a generative archive, like where it can grow. It's a living being. It's not a lot of time people think like, oh, it's in the archives. That means it's dead. It's a dead thing. And it's not. And I like what Valerie was saying. It's a living archive. It's very generative. And how you use it is really what is fantastic. And it can be fantastical too. But I think again, it's a context. And like, so I think too, part of it is bridging that sort of sense of, the archive as a place to generate new knowledge, but also to generate new art potentially too, in many ways.
And making sure to know, like, to be critical about like what primary documents within archives are. Like there's a painting of the sale of Manhattan that is a primary document that says like the natives sold Manhattan, for a few trinkets, and it's like primary documents, and they show this. It's not true, right? So yeah, you have to know, or you have to come to the archive with a bit of criticality in that this is only a slice of what is there, and it is somebody's perspective.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today, for everyone in person, everyone virtually, and very much our panelists and moderators. Thank you again to everybody for coming today.